there's just the idea that the U.S. could just suddenly drop the ball and forget everything they learned from these pandemic. They have a whole detailed pandemic response plan. For them to deliberately not follow these things, this is not a mistake, this is not an accident, this is not an escaped oopsie.
Recently, protesters in Ohio marched on their state capitol to protest these lockdowns. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that you're going to see a lot more of that. I'm surprised there aren't more people demonstrating in the streets, but I guess we should take this as a sign of encouragement, and more people should get out there, because this is just, it's ridiculous. And they're talking now like it's going to be, until we have a vaccine, nobody's going to be able to come outdoors.
We feel like the virus is less of a danger to us than our rights being stripped from us.
Well, hopefully they lift the lockdown before the 4th of July so we can celebrate our freedom.
There's just people who, again, like me, feel like their constitutional rights have been violated.
I think you nailed it on the head. We went from zero to Gestapo like overnight.
If they get a little bit of pushback, like these protests that are going on in Ohio, the more pushback they get, the less able they will be to just like shove all this stuff in under the cover of the virus. Because I mean, it's right now they're getting nothing. We're supine. We're just laying there quivering in fear. You can't even trust the tests they're going to insist that be administered, because some of them were contaminated with coronavirus. I mean, they want you completely off balance so that the only thing you can depend on is the loving embrace of the state. Let Big Brother make it all better for you. So.
Welcome everyone, I'm Spiro. Joining me today is the brilliant Helen Buyniski. She's a writer and a journalist for RT. She also contributes to Global Research. And be sure to follow her on her own website, helenofdestroy.com. Helen, thanks for joining me today.
Good to be here.
Now today we're going to be talking about the latest developments surrounding what many people are now calling the plandemic, of course referring to the coronavirus outbreak, and the COVID-1984 response to it. Now, we're also going to be covering a couple of recent articles that you wrote for RT. Now, let's start off with your article titled, "What Did They Know Exactly? U.S. Intel Warned of Cataclysmic Coronavirus Pandemic in November 2019, Reports Claim." Now, we didn't start first hearing reports about the coronavirus in the U.S. till after the new year, if my memory serves. Now, in your article, you report that U.S. intelligence appears to have had knowledge about this dating all the way back to November. What can you tell us about this?
Well, this is based on a report that came out in ABC News. There was citing 4 mysterious sources in the intelligence community that basically said that this organization, this National Center for Medical Intelligence, had been observing the Chinese response to the virus. And this was going as far back as November, and they had kind of raised the alarm inside the intelligence community towards around Thanksgiving. Right before Thanksgiving was when the initial report came out. And then based on that report, a whole bunch of other reports proliferated through the intelligence community. And supposedly these all eventually coalesced into a report that was dumped on Trump's desk in January at some point. But the fact that intelligence community was gathering information and observing response to the virus back in November. I mean, if they came out with a report around Thanksgiving, then that means they were gathering information before. And as the original report says that I based my article on, they were talking about how it might go back as far as November, or like mid-November, even early November, which would put them there right at the beginning of the epidemic, or at least when it's supposed to have begun. I mean, Trump constantly hammers on how China hid it from the world, or didn't tell the world, and it seems like his own intelligence people were either hiding it from him, or he's pretending that he didn't know about it. And somebody is not telling the truth there. Of course, the ABC report was officially denied by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, who has a policy of not denying anything or not commenting on anything. So the fact that he came out of nowhere and the Director of National Intelligence, I don't know if it was the director himself or just his office, but this was posted and came out, multiple denials. In fact, first they denied in response to CNN, and then they denied on Twitter because people kept sharing the original article. I guess, it's almost like they don't take the government's word for something anymore. Funny how that works. When you lie to someone your entire life, they tend to not agree with everything you say. But yeah, there's definitely somebody's not telling the truth here, and it points to the U.S. being a little more involved in the origins of this virus than we might initially have been told, let's say.
Well, the old saying, never believe anything until it's been officially denied. I think that certainly it was the first thing that popped in my head when I had seen, when you shared that DNI tweet, the official DNI tweet, even quoting a CNN article on Twitter saying, we have notified CNN that this is, not entirely true, basically. So if the U.S. intelligence knew about this as early as in November, how does this change what we know about the timeline and the official story, like as in general? I know you touched on it there, but because we have the World Military Games that were taking place, that were just kind of wrapping up right around that time in Wuhan, where the U.S. had 300 military members, and who knows who else was packaged in there with them.
Yeah, it really does put the timeline right around there, because I think that the U.S. representatives at the World Military Games started arriving in mid-October, actually. If you look at, there's a few articles in Chinese media about just that they were starting to show up. And of course, at the time, nobody thought anything was weird. So it was just a very perfunctory article. But it talks about how the U.S. representatives are starting to arrive in Wuhan and et cetera. So it completely trashes the whole idea that, this came out of a wet market and, those unsanitary Chinese, they don't know what they're doing. And even though that story has had so many holes punched in it, the media keeps talking about these wet markets like this is some sort of like international crisis that we need to do something about. Completely beside the point. But this points to the World Military Games, underlines that theory as being extremely plausible, because otherwise, there's no one else has put forth any theories as to the origin, let's say. And until somebody comes out with a more plausible one, it seems like a lot of focus should be on that one.
Well, yeah, so like you stated, the official flimsy stories that it came out of bat soup there in the wet market, I think that knowing that in Wuhan they had multiple different facilities, including that level 4 bioweapons lab right there in Wuhan, that if their flimsy bat soup story fell apart, everyone would kind of turn and look, well, there's this giant facility right here. Plus the Chinese CDC has a facility not far from the wet market there in Wuhan. But again, it's like you stated, it's very hard to not take into consideration the World Military Games that happened in Wuhan, ground zero, just before this took place. Thousands, nearly 10,000 military athletes were all there, including the support personnel. It would have been the perfect cover to conduct an operation. So now, just like we've seen in the aftermath of 9/11, it was said multiple times that nobody could have seen this coming, that planes could have been used by terrorists and flown into buildings, despite the fact that Operation Northwoods, which was a proposed false flag operation against the Cuban government, originated with the U.S. DoD and the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the U.S. back in 1962. And in this proposal, they called for the CIA or other government operatives to both stage and actually commit acts of terrorism against military, U.S. military, and civilian targets, to then only blame those attacks on the Cuban government and use it to justify a war against Cuba, the classic problem reaction solution, false flag narrative that we've seen. Of course, NORAD was conducting a drill on 9/11, that exact same day, the exact same scenario, which later unfolded that day. So, it's crazy to see the same script being repeated over and over, and that nobody could have seen this coming. Except, of course, Bill Gates, who famously at this point warned 5 years ago in a TED Talk of this exact scenario, a global pandemic. And as you and I covered in our previous report, the Rockefeller Foundation funded Lockstep document that was written 10 years ago, where they called out, basically, as you correctly pointed out, that the only real response to this kind of a situation would be an authoritarian police state crackdown, which is, I believe, what we're seeing unfold right now. But now we learn about another Pentagon memo from 2017 that ties into your reporting and your reports. What can you tell us about this Pentagon report?
Well, basically, it's in a similar way that Operation Northwood I think there were, by some counts, there were about 42 drills that were 9/11 elements that were going on either the same day or in the months immediately preceding. Yeah, this is one of those equivalent for this pandemic. Basically, it suggests that a virus came from human-animal transmission, possibly from a wet market. They even mentioned the wet markets. It's kind of ridiculous how closely this parallels the script of what we're seeing unfold now. And basically, yeah, that it comes out and it spreads subtly because its symptoms can be mistaken for other things, and I'm assuming that's initially what happened in China. Would be one of the explanations for why they didn't warn the world sooner. I think they probably didn't know for several weeks until they started examining the sick people closer. But yeah, it basically shows the exact sequence of events as far as the virus spreading everywhere. And actually, the part about this report that concerns me the most is because I also heard this from the UN Director General Guterres the other day, talking about how terrorist groups are going to use this as cover to stage a bioattack. Now, if I hadn't heard that from Guterres the other day, I would just discount this as the U.S. making everything about terrorism, as our military is wont to do. But for the fact that this has otherwise followed the script so closely, and the fact that this, it's going to be terrorism meme is being put out into the world, I'm afraid we might have only seen the first stage of what could be a two-stage and very devastating psyop. It's not like they don't already have all this authoritarian stuff being unrolled. And I mean, people are starting to get a little tired of being cooped up in their houses. They might need something a little more heavy-handed to keep them going with the program.
Very good points, very concerning as well. Now, before we get into your next article that I want to cover, I just have to ask you, since RT is, a Russian publication, did Putin tell you to write these stories?
No, I do not have any contact with Putin. I've never met the guy. I've never spoken to even people in his office. We're pretty distant from the Russian government. I mean, I'm an American. I write for RT because American media doesn't let you tell the truth. So RT, you get a little more freedom there.
Well, I had to ask because there's undoubtedly always one or two down in the comments saying, RT, she's a Russian agent. She's a Russian agent. Can't believe anything you're saying, except for here we are talking about what's actually taking place. We're talking about what the mainstream media refuses to talk about. So thank you. I just had to throw that in there. Things have been
classic shoot the messenger, unfortunately.
Right. Now, things have been escalating really quickly, and we are seeing all sorts of new Orwellian social controls and techniques being rolled out. Now, in your another recent article, which just came out, it's titled, Apple and Google debut Bluetooth-based contact tracing platform to combat COVID-19 and end privacy ? Now, Helen, please tell us what the heck these tech giants in Silicon Valley are up to right now.
So the initial epidemic in China ended up with some of the Chinese tech companies developing these contact tracing apps, which basically if an infected person comes into contact with another person, that other person gets an alert on their phone where they say, you need to get tested because you've just been in contact with an infected person. And the Chinese app and some of the other countries' apps used, I think, location-based proximity to alert people of the fact that they had come into contact with the infected. Now, this Apple and Google one, supposedly it protects your privacy because they only use Bluetooth, so the phones interact with each other, but it's decentralized and nobody has any idea what's going on. And I'm sorry, when this is one of those fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, won't get fooled again, as George W. Bush said. This you can't take their word for it because they have lied to us so many times, and I don't trust, especially Google, whose way of protecting people's privacy is basically to violate it repeatedly, then apologize later and say, we'll never do it again until we do. But you can't do anything about it because we're a $1 trillion company, and who else are you going to go to? Apple? Oh, right, Apple's doing it too. So the idea that these two super corporations are the ones behind this should chill anyone to the bone. I think at least anyone who's concerned about privacy. I mean, yes, we do want to know if we've come into contact with an infected person, but do we want to throw our privacy under the bus and hand it just on a silver platter to these two companies? It seems like a trade-off that I don't think a lot of people would be willing to make if they had a choice. I'm worried that this will not be a choice because, as I wrote in my article, they plan on putting this into the operating systems of the phones. I mean, and you can't switch off location services because they don't use location services. They use Bluetooth. So, I mean, unless you want to walk around with your phone turned off, and as we've seen in the past, they can turn your microphone on and turn your location services on when your phone is off. So I mean, you really can't get around this. And it's not like it's in the hardware, because this will be in the operating system. So you can have an old phone, fine, but when you download the latest update of the operating system, you will get the tracking. And so this is a very concerning development, I would say.
Well, and then, in addition to that, we've seen major issues with the testing and false positives. And I know that this question may not be very relevant, but, considering everyone has a cell phone nowadays, but what about the people that don't have cell phones?
Oh, they get to wear specially made armbands with a Bluetooth receiver in them. I mean, this is really scary because I mean you don't. We're supposed to be like the liberal democracies, and we don't put armbands on people with Bluetooth trackers in them. That this is like against everything that we are supposed to stand for as a nation. And just the idea of so many of our principles have just been thrown away in the garbage because, oh, scary, scary virus. We've been faced with much more concerning pathogens than this one, and we haven't done this. So this is a complete overreaction and an insane, just like I said, throwing away everything we stand for just because we're told to fear this virus.
Now, a few more questions for you, Helen. Remember the recent report about the prison inmates digging mass graves in New York? And you're currently in New York City. Now, did you happen to see the drone footage of what appeared to show bodies being buried in those mass graves?
Yes, I did. And while this was used to gin up the latest anti-Trump hashtag, oh, Trump burial pits, oh, look, they're digging mass graves in parks. And I had also read some stuff about, oh, they're going to bury people in public parks. Well, the mass graves are being dug on Hart Island, which is a potter's field, which, if you don't know, is a cemetery for poor people and unclaimed people who have no relatives who come to give them a proper funeral. Also, people who die while in prison, people who are too poor to afford a proper funeral. Nobody, at least as of Thursday, with coronavirus, had actually been buried in these pits. They were being dug in advance of like an overflow of dead bodies from regular cemeteries. They've predicted huge numbers of deaths that are not coming to pass. They may come to pass in the future, but they just want to be prepared, basically. And the idea that people are just dropping dead in the streets and being shoved into the nearest park that prisoners are out digging labor for. I mean, I don't think the original video had all of this context around it, but this was the story that kind of developed around it, as things are wont to do on social media. Funny how that disinformation doesn't get taken down, but you try to post anything that's questioning the narrative or suggesting, maybe we shouldn't be living in fear, then no, your post has got to go shadow banned or actually banned.
Yes, that's right. And recently we've seen Dr. Tony Fauci, one of the top members of Trump's coronavirus task force, talking about conspiracy theorists and how we just should ignore them, don't question the official story, don't worry about that. And when I had seen this, the very first time I had seen the actual drone footage of these mass graves was from a tweet from Now This. They tweeted it, and it didn't mention anything about coronavirus. It said that these graves were being used, like you stated, for people who didn't have next of kin. They didn't know who they were, whatever. So, and there's a history of this happening there, as you stated. So that was what the context was surrounding that. But if you do a quick search on Google, trusted Google again, and you type in, coronavirus, New York, mass graves, you see tons and tons of articles from mainstream articles talking about how these are coronavirus mass graves. And it's just, just the initial tweet of it was concerning to me when I had seen it from Now This, because I'm thinking, well, that's perfectly timed. Of course, people are going to confuse this with this global pandemic that we can't get away from. We can't, everywhere you go, you're hearing about it. And so just that in itself, I believe, is to instill that fear, to keep people on that tight chain, keep them obedient, justify the lockdowns and whatever else they have planned rolling out. Now, you're currently in New York, and we're hearing from these same sources that it's perhaps the hardest city hit on the entire planet right now. The mass graves and everything, the hospitals are overflowing and everything. What can you tell us? Like, what have you seen? How bad is it there from your experience being in New York City?
I mean, maybe I'm just in a pocket of relative calm, but the most change that I've seen is that now people have to wait in line to get into the supermarket, and it's kind of annoying because some of us have to shop at places that are more costly because they don't make people wait in line to get in. I mean, I haven't been inside hospitals, so I don't know. Perhaps all hell is breaking loose indoors, but my local hospital didn't seem like there was much activity when I drove by there. I mean, people are not dropping dead in the streets in Brooklyn, and we're told that Brooklyn and Queens are like the hardest hit, or at least that's what it was the other week when I happened to chance upon those numbers. But it's pretty quiet. Obviously, everybody's indoors. You don't see a whole lot of cars outside, but you see people on their bikes. A lot of people wearing face masks, but other than that, like I said, the biggest inconvenience is that we now have to wait in line to get inside everywhere. And of course, that's training people to be obedient with completely illogical rules, especially everybody's wearing a face mask. I thought those were supposed to protect you in some way, but they can't seem to get their story straight on that either.
Right, absolutely. And we're seeing other straight up Orwellian tactics being rolled out at stores like Walmart, where they have broadcasters, PA systems just announcing to people, maintain your social distance, or the amount of people who can enter the store is limited and restricted, and loitering is a crime. And I mean, it's just straight out of 1984. It just continues to increase exponentially. But recently, protesters in Ohio marched on their state capitol to protest these lockdowns. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that you're going to see a lot more of that because people they've been laid off from their jobs. They're broke. A lot of people didn't pay rent last month because they don't have any money. I mean, people are pissed off, and they have a good reason to be so because they were told that staying indoors is the only way that we're going to all keep safe from the virus. And they're now realizing that they've been sold a bill of goods and that the economy was shut down for no good reason, and that they don't that the government doesn't have any plans for opening it back up and getting them back on track and getting them any economic relief. I mean, this idea of a $1,200 check seems to be evaporating in the wind. I don't think anybody's seen any money yet, but obviously the large corporations have seen money. A lot of big companies have seen bailouts, but small businesses trying to get these loans that opened up last week are finding that they have to jump through all these hoops, and then some places are being denied because they weren't already in debt to the bank. It's really a very bad situation, and I'm surprised there aren't more people demonstrating in the streets, but I guess we should take this as a sign of encouragement, and more people should get out there because this is it's ridiculous. And they're talking now like it's going to be, until we have a vaccine, nobody's going to be able to come outdoors. Oh, great. Well, that's easy for you to say, Bill Gates. You have billions and billions of dollars. The rest of us can't put food on the table. So it's pretty bad.
We feel like the virus is less of a danger to us than our rights being stripped from us. There's just people who, again, like me, feel like their constitutional rights have been violated.
The agenda is very apparent. They're not even trying to hide it at this point. They are just straight up, telling you. And I've covered in multiple reports recently the actual footage of Bill Gates saying these things, which it just blows my mind that he's even saying this. And from what I've seen, on social media and from what I've heard with talking with people, is they are freaked out by this. I haven't, really talked to anybody that's like, what, I can't wait till that coronavirus vaccine comes out, Now, in your opinion, what's coming next? Will the lockdown be lifted soon, or is it going to be extended, and for how long? Indefinitely? I mean, I know it's hard to answer, but just from your take on this as you've been following it closely.
Unfortunately, what I'm seeing is that, at least in New York, unfortunately, because I live here, looks like the lockdown is going to be extended. I think they might find a way to lift it in some parts of the country while keeping it in place in others. I would like to see it lifted everywhere, of course. I think it should be lifted everywhere. But I think that as much as Trump has said he wants to get the economy back open, which we desperately need because, again, most people can't put food on the table, nobody's paying rent. I don't think that the Faucis and the Bill Gateses will permit that. And Trump has shown that he is willing to do what he is told. And so I don't think that his wishes really count for much. And yeah, this is until they might find a compromise in which they allow people to go out if they've been tested or if they've had the virus. In which case, of course, we're all going to have to carry around our papers showing our test results, which is basically, in a way, it's the first step towards the vaccination, the whole chipping scenario. So that might be the compromise, but unless they come out with that, then I think that the lockdown is probably going to be in place for a little while.
Well, hopefully they lift the lockdown before the 4th of July so we can celebrate our freedom.
Yeah.
Any final points you'd like to make, Helen, before we go today?
Yeah, not really. I just, I wish that I had answers for what people should do, because I know a lot of people, especially those who aren't working, would really like to do something to like fix this situation. I know that I do, and I hate to see, I mean, just the sheer number of people who've been put out of work, who are now marinating in their own like despair or being told they're non-essential. I mean, that's going to create a mental health like catastrophe. I think that while the initial numbers for the deaths from the virus have been revised lower and lower and lower, you're going to see deaths from like suicide, drug abuse, alcoholism go through the roof, and they might even end up with their initial body count. I read a piece on Off Guardian earlier today that was talking about ways in which, like, just by the number of poor people who this economic shutdown has unilaterally created, has increased in such a way that deaths could go above 2 million just through the results of people, the diseases of poverty, malnutrition, not being able to feed your children. I mean, I don't know the methodology with which they calculated this. I'll have to examine that closer to see the legitimacy of it. But they could get their body count after all, and it will be completely of their own design, and that's criminal. And these people belong in jail.
Well said. And I mean, when I had seen the people protesting there in Ohio, my initial thoughts were, well, it's about damn time. Helen, you're absolutely right about the solutions. I agree with you completely. It's very difficult to find solutions. A lot of us feel lost in this, and what can we do? What can we do? And that's what we've heard for so long, and so many people just kind of passively just accept that now. It's like, oh, it's just the way it is. I mean, it's been like that for a long time, and the thing we have to understand, though, is that there really isn't a silver bullet solution, like one solution solves all problems type of a solution. And because these social engineers have been hard at work in getting us where they want us incrementally for quite some time now.
Yeah, the program of alienation has been going on for years and years. I mean, like our previous interview, the Rockefeller Foundation simulation was 2010, and so that they've been working on it before that too. And so this idea of atomizing society, where the social distancing is alienation by another name. So you can't trust your neighbor, you can't trust your family, they don't even want people petting their cats because, oh, you can give your cat coronavirus. I mean, come on, this is insane, and it's just the granularity of the programming. Like, every single thing is just and you can't even trust the tests they're going to insist that be administered because some of them were contaminated with coronavirus. I mean, they want you completely off balance so that the only thing you can depend on is the loving embrace of the state. Let Big Brother make it all better for you. So it's really scary, and I mean, on one level, you have to not let the fear reduce you to a quivering ball of jello. But on the other level, it's like, you know what you're dealing with here, and know that this isn't the sort of thing where you can just, push the bully and then he leaves you alone for the rest of your life. This is going to take some coordinated effort, and this is going to take a lot of thinking and a lot of like strategizing, because you can't just run up and slap the bully and he leaves you alone. And this is not that's not how it works. But I'm a little concerned about this whole, the bioterror is going to be the next thing. So I would say watch out for that meme and call it out when you see it, because if we make enough noise about it, maybe they'll have to put it on the shelf for a future date. I know it's been accomplished before, so maybe we can at least put that one off.
And I've been saying, kind of sounding the alarm too, even I think before and as we're seeing this type of rhetoric talk just from being an observer of history and current events and everything, that the stage is set for this, and I've been saying this for a little while, like, hey, the stage is set for a false flag at this point, and a lot of people's responses have been, well, we're in a false flag right now, and I get that, but I mean, they are now openly saying, yes, hey, ISIS and Al Qaeda could just use this crisis, because we're so weakened right now, but it's they could use it to attack us. And just like they're saying that the drug cartels could be using this to, this crisis to bring more drugs into the country when everything's shut down. There's not a lot of people out there. They'd kind of stick out like a sore thumb. I think that they are using that excuse to move around significant portions of military, naval assets. And so that's kind of strange too, leading up to this. So April, we've seen things unfold in April before. I wouldn't be surprised if something does happen. And like you said, be there, be on top of it, be on the lookout for it. And I'm not quite sure what kind of scenarios they would have because there isn't like any large gatherings of people. But, excuse me.
Yeah, they've been trying to work that one out. I've seen, back a couple of months ago when they were trying to say that, white supremacists are telling their members to go cough on cops and Jews. Wait, what? That doesn't even make sense. And I think they had to kind of like soft pedal that one because it was just like too ridiculous, and people still had enough of a sense of humor to laugh at it. That's the other thing, is that we really need to not lose our sense of humor. In the aftermath of 9/11, everybody lost their sense of humor, and the country turned almost overnight from being like able to laugh at itself, we're the superpower number one hegemon. And everything was so serious. And if you weren't with us, you were with them. So now it's like, if you hear people start saying, if you're not with us, you're with the virus, then it's time to just like, I don't know if anybody started saying that yet, but I've seen this before. Let's put it that way. I think we all have. We just want this not to, like, people just completely fell down on the job after 9/11, and we need to not do that this time.
Well, when it becomes
like off limits to question the official story, because you're seeing now with people who question the wisdom of rolling out 5G without safety testing it or anything. Those people are the enemy, and so they're using this to just slip in so much stuff. But I'm sorry, you were starting to say something.
No, well, we spoke off record recently, and you said we were talking about all this stuff and what's we've been each seeing and the reports and working on a side project, and you said, I think you nailed it on the head. We went from zero to Gestapo like overnight, and I think it's just continuing to increase. As every day we're seeing more and more stuff that's just continuing to blow my mind, at least. And you're right about the sense of humor. People, if you lose your sense of humor, you might as well be dead anyways. This is, and of course, I have to play this George Carlin bit right here on germs.
It's just one more way of reducing your liberty and reminding you that they can fuck with you anytime they want, as long as you put up with it. As long as you put up with it. Which means, of course, anytime they want. Because that's what Americans do now. They're always willing to trade away a little of their freedom in exchange for the feeling, the illusion of security. What we have now is a completely neurotic population obsessed with security and safety and crime and drugs and cleanliness and hygiene and germs. There's another thing. Germs. Where did this sudden fear of germs come from in this country? Have you noticed this? The media constantly running stories about all the latest infections, salmonella, E. coli, hantavirus, bird flu, and Americans they panic easily, so now everybody's running around scrubbing this and spraying that and overcooking their food and repeatedly washing their hands, trying to avoid all contact with germs. It's ridiculous, and it goes to ridiculous lengths. In prisons, before they give you a lethal injection, they swab your arm with alcohol. It's true. It's true. It's true. Well, they don't want you to get an infection. And you can see their point. Wouldn't want some guy to go to hell and be sick.
It's funny you mentioned that, because there was actually a case that I wrote about for RT where they were in Texas. They postponed an execution because of coronavirus. They postponed 2 executions because of coronavirus. We can carry, and the governor actually said something like, we think we can carry out the execution safely. I was like, wait, what? Okay, so you don't want him to catch a virus before you kill him. I get it, but I don't get it. It's really weird. And yeah, like the Zero to Gestapo comment was in reference to the people going door to door looking for fugitive New Yorkers in Rhode Island. And while she had supposedly rescinded that order, she didn't really rescind it. She just made it so it's like for all states now. I guess they can go door to door looking for like interstate refugees, which is just so absurd on its face. I mean, you would think these are people who are going to fleeing to their summer homes, rich New Yorkers fleeing to their summer homes. So they own that property. They should be able to go there. I mean, that's like, that doesn't even make sense. It would be one thing if it was the poor's, I suppose. But I guess that's probably why Cuomo threatened to sue her, because they call him Governor 1%. He's totally in the bag for the 1%, and so he's protecting the rich New Yorkers in their summer homes. But that's just scary. You should be able to go door to door, kicking doors in, looking for people with out-of-state plates or out-of-state licenses. That's absurd.
It absolutely is absurd, and we've been seeing this. And one of the top guys, Dr. Michael J. Ryan of the World Health Organization, just endorsed that same thing, saying they have the apps in some of these countries, and now it's time to go door to door. Another shocking level of authoritarianism and police state surrounding us right now.
Yeah, and I think that if they get a little bit of pushback, like these protests that are going on in Ohio, the more pushback they get, the less able they will be to just like shove all this stuff in under the cover of the virus. Because I mean, it's right now they're getting nothing. We're supine. We're just laying there quivering in fear. And think that people, at least the more that their finances get cut to the bone, the more they're forced to do something. I mean, one of the ways that they've been able to keep us from resisting for so long is that people were satiated. People, I mean, the fattest country in the world, people just eating and drugging and drinking and doing and Netflixing themselves into oblivion. When they can't afford to do any of that stuff, you're going to start seeing people wake up. So while I do not support the fact that they're economically destroying us, that would be the only silver lining that I could possibly think of, is that once you take the food off people's table, then they have no choice. I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing, but you got to find the positive where you can.
Well, and that's just it. We're hearing more and more about the breakdown of the supply chain and the food supply chain, for that matter. When people can't get food, or whether it's because they're broke or it's because there is no food to get, that's when it gets real. People get really desperate, and it could get extremely dangerous. I'm not trying to fearmonger, but we have to look at the news and information that we have access to, and of course, with a grain of salt, analyze everything. But I mean, yes, that's to absolutely just rule certain things out and accuse someone of being a fearmonger sometimes is not a good perspective. It's good. That's just kind of the way my mind works. I'm always trying to see different potential outcomes and just based off of history and current events. And so it's definitely people should be ready. And spending all your money on toilet paper isn't the answer, I don't think.
Yeah. I think that was one of the ways that they were using to see that their propaganda was working, because they'll slip in like a little identifiable meme in there, and toilet paper was this one. Or very early on, you heard stories about in Hong Kong, people are rioting over toilet paper, and I mean that became the way that they could tell that it was their propaganda and not people's independent thought about, maybe I should stockpile in response to scary virus. It was, maybe I should stockpile because the media is telling me to stockpile. So that was just a way that they could identify their own success.
Well, that, and if people are so busy stockpiling toilet paper and doing toilet paper runs, then they're not going to be doing bank runs, going and pulling all their money out of the banks.
True.
That's true. And the money has virus anyway, so that's another way to prevent the people from doing bank runs. But if anyone's going to crash the global economy and this current monetary system, it is certainly the ones who are running it straight into the ground on purpose, in my opinion. With everything that we've seen leading up to this, with the great work that you have done exposing a lot of these events leading up to this, and then now we're seeing it unfold and who benefits, and it's just, in my opinion, I am certain, in my own opinion, that based on everything we've seen, that this is an organized operation unfolding, taking place right now, that there is, I do not believe any way at all whatsoever that this originated organically from a food market in Wuhan, China. So as you stated, and you've shown in your many reports, this is fulfilling an agenda, a very specific agenda that is wide-ranging. It's a multifaceted, attack basically at this point. And I just want to thank you and the others out there like you. There are a lot of people out there doing some great work, and this is what we need. This is what we need to do. And then solutions, like you said, solutions are extremely important. I'm always trying to think of coming up with solutions, but we're in this together. It takes all of us to do this.
Yeah, and I would say just getting back to what you said earlier about how there are multiple bio research laboratories in Wuhan, and how theoretically, I mean, some of our august government personages have tried to say that the Chinese, it escaped from a lab. Well, how does China actually benefit from a situation like this? You have to look at that, because the plausibility of that is, it basically relies on people just thinking that, the Chinese don't know how to handle their bioweapons. This has been, you have so many simulations, so many, I mean, it's not just the ones that we've talked about on your channel here. There are other ones, and there was one, I think, last year. There was another one in 2017. There have been a lot of these things, and there's just the idea that the U.S. could just suddenly drop the ball and forget everything they learned from these pandemic. They have a whole detailed pandemic response plan. For them to deliberately not follow these things, this is not a mistake. This is not an accident. This is not an escaped oopsie. This is a very definite plan, and it's benefiting one country in particular. And it's benefiting a couple countries in particular, but the U.S. and its junior partners in empire. So that's pretty much.
Absolutely. And, I also think we really need to take into consideration that the ones running these countries, the ones that sit up above these countries, they over history, they've been playing both sides off against each other anyways, so to create that divide and conquer and that order out of chaos type of mentalities and tactics, so ultimately at the end of the day, those rulers are going to benefit from this. I mean, as we march in lockstep, towards this global governance, they're all, I believe, on board with this, and the central banks are on board with this. The United Nations is certainly a leading driving this force forward. And, again, I mean, it's just, I know we could go on for, and on and on. There's just so much to cover here, and analyze. And I can't wait for you to come back on soon, and cover the latest again. So Helen, thank you so much for joining me today. Again, I'll be sure to leave your links to your website, helenofdestroy.com. I'll leave all your social medias, your Twitter, your YouTube. And thank you again so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thanks.
Well, again, I'm not as deep an expert on that as I am on vaccines.
Now we need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and remove them and isolate them.
We want to thank you for turning folks in and making sure we are all safe.
For the world at large, normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population.
A new world order. A new world order. A new world order.
The scenario you will be presented with this morning could easily become one shared reality one day. I fully expect that we will be confronted by a fast-moving, highly lethal pandemic of a respiratory pathogen.
But also there will be a surprise outbreak. There will be a surprise outbreak. There will be a surprise outbreak.
If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. Eventually, what we'll have to have is certificates of who's a recovered person, who's a vaccinated person.
A new world order.
Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. Now that's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
A new world order.